guys, I am here to show you today how to sew on a button. Okay, so obviously this is one of the most basic things that you can do as part of clothing repair, but it's also something that maybe you are going to use a button to decorate at some point. Some buttons, this one looks really basic, I know, but some buttons actually have really fun designs, whether it's the shape or they'll carve things into them. So buttons, they're useful. We're going to be going over how to attach a button properly to your fabric so that it will, number one, be anchored really well, but number two, it's actually going to hold up over time without distorting how your clothes sit. So, as you can see here in front of me, I've got my fabric, I've got a button, and I've got my needle and thread prepped and ready to go. I've got a nice big knot right there. And there's my needle, okay? And then I've got scissors for the very end when I'm ready to tie it off. Now, one thing I do want to say, if you can't see it clearly, I actually have put both ends of my thread together and tied a knot at the end. Okay, I've basically folded my thread in half. Now, I'm gonna do that because number one, it is going to be stronger when I sew on my button, but number two, it makes the process go just a little bit faster. Okay, next thing you may have noticed is I have on my fabric a little X marked. Now guys, one thing I do want to clarify is make sure that you are using an actual fabric pencil. I have this just off to the side, but you can see water-soluble marking pencil. This is something that when I use it to mark fabric, it'll come out the next time I wash my clothes. Okay, don't use pen or even a regular pencil on something that you're going to be wearing and you're going to be aware of what it looks like afterwards, because pen doesn't come out of clothes, guys, and pencil doesn't actually do all that great a job either. Okay, so I've got my X that I've marked there. Now, first thing I am going to do is take my needle and I'm actually going to go as close to the center of the X as I can from the back side. Now guys, if you actually want to start with the X on the underside of your fabric, that is totally fine. For me today, I'm feeling like I want it to be right there, okay? So, I'm actually now going to fold my fabric pretty much right in half with my needle coming out the middle of it, okay? And we're gonna see why in just a second. So go ahead, pull that through, and you guys can see I've got my nice strong knot there, not gonna come through. Now I am ready to start sewing on my button. So as you can see, my button has 4 holes. The process is gonna be the same if it only has 2. However, I am going to have to make a full X for this button to stay on my fabric. If it only has 2 holes, you're only gonna make 1 line going straight across your button, and so you're gonna save on your stitches. Now guys, here we go. I'm gonna go ahead, get sewing. So all I did right there was I pushed my button down the length of my needle and thread, right? Not super exciting. Here is where we start to have to think a little bit, okay? I'm actually going to get my button so that it's right over where my X is, and I've got my hole exactly separated over that middle folded line, okay? Now, we're gonna see at the end there's actually a reason that I'm doing that, but right now, my life's pretty easy. That I am just going to put my needle through, and you can see, just straight through. And if you feel good enough about just stabbing it through again, you can, but I'm actually gonna flip it over to the back side so that you can see I'm going just a little bit in from that edge, okay, and I'm gonna pull it through. And so that's just enough to catch right over top of my X. It's gonna be centered and it's gonna be right where I want it to be, okay? So I'm gonna go through that process 2 or 3 more times, just really quick. Pull it through, and on the back side, we don't have to go exactly through the same spot because the button's gonna cover it, but pretty close because we want our button to stay centered, okay? And I'm actually gonna go through that hole one more time, okay? And I'm going to be oh so sneaky here, and I'm actually going to put my needle through just one layer of my fabric so that you can kind of see as I pull it through. I've made almost an anchor stitch right next to my knot, okay? So that's all looking good. That's right where we want it to be. So I've had my fabric folded one direction. I'm now actually going to fold it exactly the other direction. And you can see as I line it up exactly why that now my other two buttonholes are lined up and ready to go. So again, guys, if you just have a buttonhole that has two holes, you will only need to fold it that first time, and then you can skip the next little bit. But because I have a four-way button, I'm going to show you what you do. So I am just going to stick my needle right there so that it's going through one of my holes that I haven't done yet. Okay, flip it over. And I'm going to do the same thing. That I'm going to go through my button about 3 times. So that was 1, 2, and 3. Okay, so it doesn't necessarily look super pretty on that side right now. But when I bring it back up to the front, you can see I've just made a nice little X going through my buttonhole. And actually, I've got a pretty tidy stitch right there on the back, okay? So, the one thing I do want to draw your attention to is because of the way that we stitched it, we've actually got a little bit of space between those stitches and the button, and that's good. We want that there. The reason being that if you're actually going to put a button on your clothes, for example, on a nice dress shirt, you've got the fabric that your button is attached to, but there's going to be another layer with a button band that actually it's got like 3 layers of fabric that need to sit underneath that button before it's going to be able to close your clothing, pretty much. So you want to actually have a little bit of extra space there so that it can lay flat without making your clothing kind of bunch up around the buttonhole because it's just a little too tight. So that looks great, but the thing is we want to protect those threads. So what we're actually going to do is we're going to take our thread coming out of our needle and we are going to wrap around the button clockwise 5 times. Okay, so I'm going to hold it in my hand and I'm going to show you guys. We've got 1 time around, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, and so if we go right there, you can kind of see that I've wrapped around it. Okay, and again, that's helping to lift it just a little bit off the fabric, but it's also protecting the thread going through our button. Okay, so our last step is we are actually going to tie a knot the same way that we do when we're tying off sewing on fabric. So what I am going to do is I am going to go straight through where I just wrapped my thread around my needle, around my button, and I'm going to take my thread and just like when we tie it at the end of sewing, I'm going to wrap it around my needle and pull it through. Okay, and I'm going to do that 2 or 3 more times. So again, put my needle straight through where I just wrapped my thread. Okay, wrap the tail of my thread that's still loose around my needle, pull it through, and we'll do it 1 more time just for good measure, going through all of that thread, wrap it around my needle, and pull it through. Okay, now guys, you can technically trim it right there, but I usually like to take it back through all of that twisted thread and to the back side just one last time. It's just something to give it a little bit of extra strength and security. So when I take it through the back side, and now I gotta look and see, right? I'm going through that thread column and my needle is coming out pretty close to my knot on the back side. Okay, there we go. Okay, and pull it through. And now I am good to take my scissors, and I can even trim the thread from my knot down just a little bit more so that it lays pretty flat. Okay, but there you can see, looks nice and clean on the back side. It lays flat. Flip it over to the front, and there you go. There is how to sew on a button.